What is going on, guys? Max Settings here, and welcome back to another review. In today's review, we are going to be taking a look at the Moondrop Illumination. Now, before we get into today's review, I just have to give a big shout out to Shenzhen Audio for providing these for review. Shenzhen Audio is an online audio retailer that carries many different brands, and they have sent me a ton of things in the past before. So once again, thanks to them for providing these for review. I will link their store in the description below. So the Moondrop Illumination is Moondrop's new single dynamic driver flagship IEM, and these have gotten quite a bit of hype recently. A lot of people really like single dynamic driver IEM designs because not everybody's a big fan of how BAs sound. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the specs, and then we will see what I think about the Illumination. So the Illumination is coming in at an $800 price point. It is using a single 25 ohm dynamic driver with a sensitivity of 124 dB a milliwatt and a frequency response of 20 to 20,000 hertz. Okay, so now into the build of the Illumination. So the Illumination, honestly, for its price, does not feel particularly well made. I'm not saying it feels cheap, but it doesn't feel particularly expensive. It is a very, very light IEM, and it just has like a shiny gold finish, as you can see, that gets very, very dirty and smudged up, I'm sure, as you can tell, just by fingerprints and I guess residue or whatever from your ear. And yeah, it doesn't feel super, super premium. It just feels, if it's metal, it's like that weird metal that almost feels like plastic. And it just does not feel super premium for a $800 price point. Something to note about them that's kind of interesting is all the venting that you can see here on the inside of the IEM. And because of that, the Illumination leaks like a decent bit. I noticed, I let a few people I know try these, and even just trying them myself, I noticed that they leak a decent bit of sound. This is almost like a semi-open IEM. It's very weird that it leaks so much sound. It also does not isolate particularly well, so that's kind of an interesting design choice. One concern a lot of people had with these was this like sharp point right here. But that's really not a problem. That doesn't really get in the way of your ear at all. That's kind of up by where the connector is. And then speaking of the connector, it is using my preferred style of 2-pin connector. But of note, for whatever reason, these 2 pins, I guess they're not recessed enough, but they pop out very easily. This is the first IEM I've had this problem with, where just having them on my head, the connectors just work themselves out and pop out. So that's kind of a bummer, particularly on such an expensive IEM. So build of these is a little bit, it's not terrible, but I wish it was a little bit better given how much it costs. And then as for comfort, the Illumination I find fairly comfortable. I personally don't really have any qualms with it. It could be a little bit more comfortable. It's not like the most comfortable IEM that I've worn, but it doesn't bother me in any way, but it doesn't just like disappear like some other IEMs do. Like I said, the point's not really a problem. The nozzle's not overly long. So yeah, I don't think you should have too many issues with the Illumination for comfort, but again, IEM comfort is highly, highly subjective. And now as for included accessories. So this is the cable that you get with the Illumination. It's kind of like a silver-plated copper cable, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this cable. It reminds me a lot of the cable from the Tin T4, just not quite as stiff, but that's basically what this feels like to me. It's just like a 2-strand that goes to single strand, and it's a little stiff, not as stiff and rubbery as the T2 is. One cool thing it does is Moondrop kind of made their own version of the Dunu connector swap system, where you can pull this off like that and then swap out your connector, so they give you 2.5 millimeter, you can go 4.4 or 3.5. And Moondrop used the RSA, I think this is what this is called, like RSA connector. This was used on like amplifiers in like the early 2010s as a balance connector, but that never really took off. A few amps used it, but it's a standard that died out. And that's what Moondrop decided to adopt for their connector system on the Illumination. So I believe you just line it up like so. and then push in and you are good to go. So that is the cable. As for the case is nothing special really. It's just a blue version with a gold zipper of the case that most of the other Moondrop IEMs come with, and then you get a couple tips, and that is all the included accessories on the Illumination. Okay, so now moving into the sound of the Illumination. So starting off with the frequency response. So the Illumination has got a little bit of warmth in the bass region and your lower mids. I'd say at the worst about 4 dB of bass boost down in your sub bass and mid bass region. And then your lower mids are forward a little bit, maybe a dB or two, and then kind of flatten out by the time you hit 1K. After that, once you get up into your upper mids, right around that like 2.5, 3K, they are a little bit forward. Now, they're not as forward as like the SSR and SSP or some of the other very vocal forward IEMs that I have recently reviewed, but they are forward a couple dB, which not enough that actually bothers me, but definitely a little bit forward, and I can see how it could be bothersome for some. And then after that, your treble, I'd say, is actually more or less in line, maybe slightly forward, but nothing too bad. There's no really weird peaks. It kind of just drops off a little bit after that, like 2 to 3K in the mids, and comes back up a little bit right around 9, 10K for a little bit of a treble peak there, but it's not really bothersome in any way to me. So the overall tuning of the Illumination is decent enough, a little bit of warmth and a little bit of forward mids, and relatively inline treble on the Illumination. Okay, so now moving into other aspects. Let's go ahead and talk detail. Now, the Illumination is a detailed IEM in every region except for the bass. String instruments sound very nice, they're very resolving, and your mid-range overall comes across fairly smooth. And moving into timbre real quick before we go to the bass. The Illumination has got very natural timbre. It is some of the best timbre that I have heard in an IEM, which is really playing into that single dynamic driver and having a relatively solid tuning. So strings sound very clear, very crisp and natural, and your mids come across very nice and clean and natural. So good detail in your treble and mids, and really good timbre overall. Now, the bass is where these things start to fall apart. The bass of the Illumination is very low res and kind of blunted. They do well with very simple bass tracks, where if you're listening to, I don't know, like some classic rock or something, maybe like an orchestra or something, and there's just one single drum hit every now and then, you get a nice punch. They have a nice punchy dynamics in that regard. But if you listen to any very complex bass tracks, EDM, one of my standard test tracks, Why So Serious from The Dark Knight, any more like complex bass lines in more upbeat rock, they just fall apart. They don't have good separation of bass notes. They don't do well with very complex bass tracks. And yeah, Why So Serious with these just didn't do it. All the notes just smeared together. It didn't have good contrast between notes, and it didn't rumble particularly well. And yeah, they just fall apart in the bass region. And that's kind of sad for these because the Blessing 2 had quite solid bass, especially for the price. And the Blessing 2, which we'll talk about a little bit when we get into the comparison section, has much better quality bass than the Illumination does. And now moving into the other aspects, head stage overall is decent enough. I'd say it's average to slightly above average, and imaging is also, I'd say, fairly up to par, and maybe again slightly above average. Nothing mind-blowing or anything, but I don't think either is bad in any regards. And like I already mentioned, dynamics overall are solid, decent micro and macro dynamics, but like I said, the bass dynamics kind of fall apart. And that is about all you need to know for the sound of the Illumination. Okay, so now moving into comparisons and my final thoughts. So I want to talk about the Blessing 2 compared to the Illumination. Now, this is the the Critical Blessing 2 Dusk, which I do have a review of this coming soon. But we're just going to use this as a point of reference real quick compared to the Illumination. Now, for those of you that saw my review of the Blessing 2, you know that I really liked the Blessing 2. It's still one of my favorite IEMs to date, and it's a great value. The Blessing 2 overall is not as good of an IEM as the Illumination. The Illumination is definitely more detailed and has much better timbre. Dynamic driver versus BA timbre, and it's just a more technically capable IEM, except in the bass region. Like I mentioned already, the Blessing 2 has got much higher quality bass than the Blessing 2. Much better texture, much better note separation, and just does better off with, you know, all the bass frequencies and everything in that region. As for other things in the price range of the Illumination, the Sony IERM9 is a little bit more than this. I've only heard it at shows. I'd say that's maybe slightly better tuned and maybe a little more technically capable than this, but it's, again, BA versus dynamic driver, and not everybody likes BA timbre. Other high-end dynamic driver IEMs, the Dunu Luna, that is more detailed than this, a lot more dynamic, but really weird tuning, which very much saddens me about the Luna. Dunu also has their newly announced Zen, which might be competing with this. We'll have to see about that. Other than that, I'm not sure what else quite off the top of my head to compare it to. Andromeda is very, very different, costs more. I really wouldn't say this is a close competitor to Andromeda. So all in all, the Illumination is a decent IEM, but like I said, I wish it just did not fall apart in the bass region. If this had the bass quality of the Blessing 2, I would say it would be a really, really good pick. It still is a good pick, but pretty much only if you listen to, I'd say, like orchestral jazz, stuff that's not highly reliant upon, bass instruments or bass frequencies. But if you listen to anything, like I said, very string focused, then I would say the Illumination is a good pick, and I do like it overall. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my review of the Moondrop Illumination. Once again, big thanks to Shenzhen Audio for providing these for review. Links of where to buy these in the description below, as well as my Twitter, my contact email, and all other relevant information. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the review. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!